Welcome to Rooted and Unwavering, a podcast and radio show which features leaders from all walks of life in conversations about courageous connectedness. How do we stay connected to our best selves, especially when we are challenged? What becomes possible when we truly stay committed to our own and others' greatness, also when we don't feel it? Join host Hilke Faber, transformational coach, facilitator, and award-winning author of Taming Your Crocodiles, and his guests as they explore leadership greatness in today's episode of Rooted and Unwavering.
Welcome to Rooted and Unwavering. This is our 13th episode of this podcast. We're broadcasting live from Business RadioX in Phoenix, where we help leaders connect more deeply to their innate potential. And today I'm here with my friend and guest, Augusto Muench. I'm so happy you're here. Augusto, how are you today?
Everything's great, Hilke. Thank you so much for having me, and welcome to everyone that just connected to the broadcast.
Wonderful. Well, it's very good to be with you. We're going to have a conversation today about connectedness, as we do in all of these podcasts about connectedness. And before I introduce you a little bit more, Augusto, I want to say a little bit more about this podcast series. This is like a bi-weekly moment where we share about what is it like to be truly connected to our best selves, and also acknowledging that we get tempted and challenged and run around in our mind so many times to not be that. And so this podcast series is to help us by listening to leaders like Augusto, to be inspired, to come back and to choose again, to continue choosing again. It's like, what is it like to come back to who I truly am, to really become what the world needs us to become, to aspire to be what we want to be our best selves. And I love learning from leaders that tell me stories, that tell us stories, that tell experiences about their experiences of staying connected and helping others be connected in their worlds and helping others do the same. So without further ado, I'm going to say a bit more about Augusto. Augusto has been with a pharmaceutical company, Boehringer Ingelheim, since in July of 1999. And if I do the math, Augusto, that's about 25 years or close to it, which is in today's world a record and a big testament. You are currently the president of Boehringer Ingelheim Mexico, Central America, and Caribbean. And you started off probably in infrastructure and management and more the technology side of things. And you've from there held leadership roles across the world. So you're a true corporate global citizen. You've been in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. And I think you're now leading from a place and living in a place that's closer to where you're very much your start of your life was, as I understand it. You're passionate about leadership, about consciousness, about leadership evolution. You've had management degrees from different schools. I think that's one of the things that's so beautiful about you. You're so innately curious about life. You've been instrumental in your own development. You've pursued courses at INSEAD and also Columbia Business School Executive Education, which is where we met. You've also studied with Fred Kaufman, who's also one of my mentors into the philosophy of conscious business. You've been practicing leading as coach. This is how we met in the course at Columbia Business School Executive Education. And you also obtained a certification in the Aleph Trust Transpersonal Coaching Psychology Principles that allow for a holistic coaching approach. So when I think of you, Augusto, I know your stated values are honesty, integrity, justice, fairness, and respect. And when I think of you, you truly embody those. What stands out for me about you is you are a person that whatever situation you're in, humanity and your heart is on the foreground. And you help all of us to stay in that place and to come back to that place. So happy to hear you here, to have you here today, Augusto. I'd love for you to start us off with a first reflection on connectedness. And maybe you can say a bit about how you have learned about connectedness in your own life and leadership. What has it been like?
Thanks, Hilke, for that introduction. And first and foremost, thanks for having me here. And there are several elements of in our conversation that will come up or that have popped up ever since I received your invitation to connect today. And before going to, particularly to that point that you're asking, interesting that I lived as a kid in a city called Hermosillo in the north of Mexico. And we used to go to Arizona very often. So we used to go to Tucson maybe every couple of weeks or 3 weeks. We went to Phoenix a couple of times. So the fact that you're sitting there and that I'm now maybe 20, 30 years later after I lived in Sonora in a radio broadcast from a Phoenix company, just it gives additional happiness to my heart to be here today with you. And I think it talks as well about connectedness and how you can find these opportunities to remain connected and be connected if you're open to it, or if your mind is open and observant to what happens in your surroundings. The process that I lived in Boehringer Ingelheim that you were reflecting on, I've been 23 years in the company. This is my 24th year. As your math was quite accurate. It took time for me and a lot of reflection to find out what connectedness really meant. And a lot of experiences throughout this period of time, where I had to come back to my roots, to connect myself to my own roots, to continue moving forward in the company and in life, clearly, as it happens. And I can share many experiences with you. The first time I had a team, and maybe we start there. So I'm a computer systems engineer, as you said, and then I moved to the business side. And I had one team at very early stages in my career here in Mexico. And for some reasons, this was a call center team. And for some reasons, the team, the day-to-day challenges that they were facing made them either take one call that was supposed to go to one person, it went to another person, and they felt that the competition wasn't fair and so on. So, and we had a weekly meeting, and this meeting was just to review objectives. Where were we? So very business oriented, see where we were, what results were we getting. But we used the first 20 minutes, half an hour of that meeting to talk about personal topics. So to have the team saying, you stole my call. No, you took my call. No, the XY said, Augusto, this is what happened, this person, and so on. And if we did not go through this moment to clear the air, sort of all the backgrounds, all the topics that were happening in the background, then the discussion about business was very unproductive. So very early in life, I recognized that the biggest challenges that we had, as if we were to develop as leaders are not related really to the business itself, but are related to people, are related to connectedness with your own roots and with the rest of the people that you work with these relationships. So quite early in this development as a leader within BI, I started exploring why we behave like we do, what happens in the background, what is the culture that you have in your team, and how supportive is that culture to actually fostering that connectedness and having conversations, having difficult conversations, and ensuring that we are true to ourselves, but also true to the values of the team, true to the values of the organization that you're working with.
Love that. And I want to go back to that moment of the space in the beginning of the conversation. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And before that, I just want to echo what you just said about Sonora. And so the Sonora, for those of us who are not familiar with it, it's a desert-like landscape. And I just want to say how thankful I am to that landscape, because I find it's very helpful in connecting with truth and what's true, because it's so barren and yet so full of life. And to me, there's a clearing that happens when I walk in the desert. And so when I think about what you just said about this conversation with your colleagues, I intuit there's a similar sense of clearing that happened in the beginning of the meeting, where people are able to get it out, right? Get it out. So my question to you is, what do you sense then lies behind the clutter? Like, once people have expressed the clutter, yeah, you did this, you took my call, I feel frustrated or whatever. And I notice this in the beginning of leadership meetings a lot, where we do a check-in, which I know you do as well. And there's like the first person talks and it's still a little bit clouded and stressed, and I'm like thinking about the last meeting and whatever it is. And then at some point it starts to calm down. So what is it that we access as we go through that process of connecting? What are we connecting to, Augusto?
I think you must experience it to actually try to sense it, because it's relaxing. It's you access your core, if you allow me to say it that way. You see, in my experience, and I'm going to try to say it with my own words, Hilke, there is a lot of noise on the constant day to day. There are unconscious traits that come out depending on the situation we're living, that start deviating our attention towards other stuff that might not be at the core of what you truly are or of what you should stand for. Even professionally, let's say business objectives, right? I have the fortune to work for a company that is focused on people health. So the objective of our or my daily job is ensuring that the products we have go to people who need them when they need them, to save lives, to improve quality of life. So anything else that stands in the way, I define as noise, right? So it's some sort of a distractions and things that get along the way that sometimes unconsciously come to us, or most of the times unconsciously come to us, right? And then we talk about amygdala and taming your crocodiles and the reptiles. And there's another experience that I want to share with the audience, if you allow me later on particularly on that. But once you're able to put your attention outside of that noise, or to clear that air, that noise, then you can truly start looking into and focusing on your core, on your objective in life, on your purpose, on the objective of, even if it's professionally, of the objective of the meeting itself. And it's not until you reach that stage that you're truly productive.
It's clearing away the noise, as you're saying, and then you get to the ground, like of what truly is important. Why are we here? Purpose, the objectives, the human connection comes to the fore. Our wisdom comes to the fore. There's a sense of being relaxed. And it's interesting, Augusto, that there's almost like the daily clutter. Like it's a daily cleansing, like, and maybe sometimes more than daily, like brushing your teeth multiple times a day,
Yeah.
to getting back to the cleanliness of the peace that lies within. So you're speaking about this, and I sense this in your being, that this is so mature in you. It's so like in you, and I know that when I'm with you, that I sense that. Can you say a bit about your own personal journey? Because I know you lead from this place as you are president in this company and in many other places of your life. But how did you cultivate this? How did you discover this? How did you learn to discern the clutter from the clarity?
It started a few years back, 6 or 7 years back, and you described the process that I lived through. The first instance where I started exploring it with a theory behind, because in practice, the experience I shared with you was way behind. It was 25 years ago, where we had these meetings with the call center, and we used the space initially to clear the air, and then go to the core of what we were supposed to be doing in the meeting. So in practical terms, it happened earlier. But when it started, and this is a computer systems engineer head, right? So when it started falling into the square where it had to fall, it was when I met Fred Kaufman in this conscious business certification, because the theory on how we behave, on the it, the we, and the me, and in this triangle that is described very nicely in conscious business, it just made sense. So in every situation I'm facing, in every meeting I'm participating in every conversation I have, what is it that makes me feel uncomfortable? Is it the purpose, the professional purpose that I have? Is it the relationships I'm having along the way that are needed for me to get to that objective that I need to fulfill? Or is it something internally that actually is making me feel uncomfortable? And once you start, dividing the uncomfortness or the noise within these three angles that every situation we face could have, then you start prioritizing what's important for you. Initially, this conscious business process changed a lot of things in me, and made a lot of sense to experiences I had before. But it left me with way more questions than answers. Okay? And this is something I think once you start this path of self reflection and trying to understand why we act as we do, you find out that it's a process. And if you, and this is hard, but if you believe you've reached a stage where you're the wise man ever, the fall that you have when you realize you're just beginning hurts even more. So every time you say, "Nah, I've done it. I've taken so many courses and so on," and then you go to work and you face a situation that you lose again, you snap again because of this noise. And you say, "Oh, how can it happen?" Right? I've been doing this training in it, and you have go back to square one, try to align yourself with your roots, try to clear the air, and then you can focus again on where you were coming from. So it left me with more questions than answers, and that led me to continue searching. And that's fortunately enough, that's where we met in the Columbia Business School, either as coach training, but it again had where I had more questions in me than answers, and it's a continuous process. It's a continuous learning and training process that we need to come back to, as you said, like brushing your teeth on a daily basis.
Right, right. So this, and I see in you that one way you work to get clarity and connect to that clarity and work through the clutter is by, first of all, doing a little inventory of the clutter. Like, okay, so is it something going on with my purpose, with the task? Is something on with my relationships that's bothering me or that's pulling me off base, or is it something within me? I would argue it's always something within me because it's my relationship to what's happening around me that is pulling me off clutter, like pulling me off center. Like nothing can make me feel. It is about how I interpret and how I relate with, as you're talking about as well. And then you're saying something about using your curious mind and your humility.
Yes.
So now I can't help but ask you, Augusto, because you talked about the wise man and falling, and I don't see you as a person who's arrogant and who says, "Oh, I've I've got this."
There, I did.
And yet, when I heard you talk about the fall, I sense that you may have experienced that in micro, macro, or medium ways. So maybe you can speak a bit about, quote unquote, the fall in your own life, how you've experienced that. Maybe give us an example of the fall and how you worked through that.
So I have one experience that where you actually were involved, and I'm going to share it with your permission with the audience and with everyone that's hearing this recording as well. So through exploring the fear families that I have in me, and where is our everyone has fears. I'm now preaching to the Pope here, but so all of us have fears, right? And in that exploration, one of the fears that is very high in me often is this fear of feeling accepted or being left out, right? So this is what happens, and or what happens to me. And at one point in my professional career in Boehringer Ingelheim, in my mental model, in my mental map, there were a few key stakeholders back in Germany in our head office that must have a say of where Augusto was going to go as a next step, right? So in my head, I had clarity that if I want to continue to be successful in the company, these 3 or 4 people need to accept Augusto, right? Otherwise, I'm not going to move. And all went fine with this group of people, except with one person. Well, and let me first show you what happened in my unconsciousness, and then I'll come to the conscious part, or to this clarification of what just happened to me. So I'm in a meeting in Germany, global meeting, all colleagues there, etc. And then I go have dinner with my team to a restaurant nearby the hotel, very nice restaurant, TVs, soccer matches playing around, having a beer, etc., etc. And all of a sudden, I start feeling ill, and I feel my heart pounding real fast, and my head feeling fussy, and I started feeling unhealthy. And I tried to relax in the restaurant, and I, have continue having my beer and chatting with kids. But on the way back to the hotel, I asked my teammates that were together with me, guys, can you please take me to a hospital? I'm not feeling well. We went to the emergency room in a hospital in Frankfurt, crossing the river, and immediate attention, EKG, like the whole process to get, like, I thought I was having like an MI, myocardial infraction, a heart attack. Everything was perfect, Hilke. So everything was, EKG perfect. They even did this test, that there's an additional test to see if you have some other type of myocardial infraction. Nothing, everything was perfect. And then the doctor said in the emergency room said, he started touching my back and said, does it hurt here? Does it hurt here? And then he reaches a point, oh, it really hurts. So yes, that hurts. So he says, can you tell me, is that the same spot that hurts in front in your chest? And I said, yes, exactly the same one. So he said, that's a nerve that gets inflamed when you're going over stress. Have you been stressed lately? I said, yeah, yes, right. You're a CEO of a company. I was back then already a CEO for the company in another geography. So you're fine, everything's fine. Try to work on your stress. Ansiolite, some prescription. I said, no, I'm not taking Ansiolite. I can take care of this myself. Went back to the hotel, did some meditation, what have you, came back to the country where I was living. And then we had a part of the training that you were leading, the leaders coach training. You asked for a volunteer to bring a case, and I brought that case. And then we started scratching what happened to me. And it turned out that this fear of not being accepted by someone that I thought was very important for my future in the company made me started to behave and develop traits that were not natural to me. That made me feel uncomfortable without success. So the outcome of that session that we had was, when you start behaving, so the risk of following on your fear and not being conscious about it is that you fall on complacency, as you said, and becoming complacent. I remember very well that question that you made, say, Augusto, imagine that person actually has a say in your future within the company. Just for a second, just imagine that person actually has a say. Now, what is the Augusto that he would want to see for him to decide for you? Is it an Augusto that falls strongly to his beliefs and values and that fights for them? Or is it the Augusto that becomes complacent because he wants to become accepted? And that was a huge fall. And that was a huge, huge fall. And I come back to that quite often because I still fall into, I still have little faults from time to time. So I consciously come back to that point, Hilke, to realize that no matter what you're facing, for you to be comfortable, you have to be aligned to your values, to your purpose, gain that connection with yourself, with capital S, right? And try to get away from all the noise that makes you end up in a hospital.
Yes. Cherokee says, listen to the whispers so you don't have to hear the screams. And that nerve saying, was saying, no, you are literally out of alignment. And I think many of us can relate to that. And the severe impact of being out of alignment, leading to physical discomfort, disease, all kinds of things that we're familiar with. And then if we're not conscious, we're going to try to solve for that. And it becomes even more complicated, medicines and treatments and all kinds of stuff, but not looking at the root. And I love how you talked about the root, which you identified as fear. Like, I am afraid of something, and I'm no longer going to be driven by this fear, in this case of being not accepted, so I can actually be my true self. And we talked about the fear paradox in that course, I remember. Like, when we give into what we fear, we actually co-create what we fear. Right? So had you given into this, you definitely wouldn't have gotten the job because you might have been dead,
Yeah.
for example. Or like a wind vane. Nobody likes to be led by a wind vane.
So by not questioning that level of uncomfort that you have and understanding where it comes from, you create actually the situation that you were fearing for. This is exactly what you're saying, the fear paradox. So it was really, really helpful. And as I said, this is so it's your, as you know, it's unconscious. So the it doesn't go away. That fear continues to be there. The practice is try to identify it earlier, you know, and on a daily basis. Try to see if there is anything today that makes you feel uncomfortable. As you said, you start brushing your teeth.
Yeah, so I have the courage to look at what's uncomfortable. And I love that you didn't make it bad. I actually love the courage that you had to even talk to your teammates and say, "Take me to the hospital." Right? That was a courageous act to also already start to heal some of that fear, because that does not show me like I have a strong leader. He needs to go to the hospital. I can imagine that sort of not going over very well for the ego mind. And then you talking about the fall, and so maybe last reflection before we go take a short break. Maybe share with us a little bit about that process of what happens within you when you become aware that you have been driven by some unconscious pattern, fear, whatever it might be, and then choosing to accept that as opposed to going to denial. What is that process like for you?
It's a complex process, Hilke. It's your ego, jumping up and saying, "No, you're not. You can't." Like you have two choices. Either you say, "That's not true," right, Hilke? Augusto, that can't be. You're president and CEO of Boehringer Ingelheim. That's not it. But after being in a hospital, it was very hard for me to say no. It doesn't work that way. But I also find myself, and this is a reflection that I've had after many or going through all these courses, right? If you really connect to your core and you really understand, well, I don't know if understand is the right word, but you try to understand, right? If you pursue this way to try to understand where your core lies, where that is, where your values are, then you will find the discrepancies between what you do and your core values. I have an anchor that I developed very early in the courses that I've taken that reminds me to go back to being humble. And I have it at all time with me. It goes with me to every meeting, every single space. Because I again, the fall, as you believe that you're more prepared, the fall hurts more. But they're like little falls from time to time that when you brush your teeth, you're say, okay, how can this be? I'm falling again for this noise that is in the way, right?
Yes.
And it just makes you snap. So I've developed a certain anchor that makes me go back to as fast as I can to this level of humility to acknowledge that there's noise and there's something that is bothering me that is not aligned to the core value that I have.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to explore more what that anchor, and you pointed to your wrist here for those who are listening, that's always with you. What is that like, and how do you practice that, and how do you return even to humility? And then with humility, how do you return to your core and what you've been learning about your core and the discrepancy between the core and not following your core? So, what I really loved about this conversation already is your opening honesty. Like, I feel so much honesty and vulnerability in what you're saying, and being able to say, yeah, this is where I take the falls, and how much strength that comes in that, comes aligned in that, by just being able to acknowledge that, because that's the clearing as we start this conversation today that allows for the depth to be there as opposed to running around and denying that there's something going on. So let's take a break now. And then after the break, we'll explore more with Augusto Muench, president in Boehringer Ingelheim, about what is it like to return to anchor and discover more about core.
You are listening to Rooted and Unwavering, presented by Growth Leaders Network, the leadership, team, and culture development company. If you would like to learn more about working on connectedness for yourself, your team, or organization, please contact Growth Leaders Network on LinkedIn. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Rooted and Unwavering. We're talking with Augusto Muench, the president in Boehringer Ingelheim. We've been talking about the fall from stability, from comfort, from thinking we know to a place of humility, and then actually finding out more about our core. So just before the break, Augusto, you started talking about this anchor that helps you. Can you say more about that?
Sure. So for whoever is joining that is not aware or that hasn't used that term anchor, right? It's throughout all the processes that I've lived or the coaching instructions that we've had, you try to explore a certain element that brings you back to consciousness, right? And that could be an experience depending on the philosophy you follow for coaching. There's different theories, but the intention is, what can you do on your day-to-day that distracts you from the noise that you will hear through your daily life and brings you back to consciousness and to be able to observe yourself as if you were a third party, right? Outside of you, and to try to analyze how you're behaving and see if you're aligned to the person that you actually want to be, right? And the hard part, at least for me or in my experience, is how do you go back from the day-to-day mindset and the day-to-day stress or your challenges that you're facing on a daily basis to absorb yourself from there and be able to, to observe yourself and see if you're there. And I use a bracelet that, I've used several now, but the current one is one that I've had maybe for the last couple of years. And it's just a small, bracelet that I wear on a daily basis, black one, for those that are not, that do not have the image right now. And every time I see it or I feel it, I remind myself of my big ego. And I remind myself that the best path to get my feet back on earth, to get connected again to my root, is to be humble. And then a couple of inhalations and exhalations later, I am more connected to myself. I don't know if ideally, but in a very brief period of time, you can get yourself from any situation you're living to a different state of mind in the process you're facing or in the challenge you might be facing at that.
So taking a step back, third party like observation of self with the intention of becoming grounded again in reality, what's true.
Yes.
And I'm curious about this black piece of rope, and you mentioned the word ego, Augusto. So why to get connected, to get rooted, do you think about ego?
Because or at least in my experience or in my belief today, is that in today's world and in the job that I'm currently holding, it is very easy to follow your ego, to not let go or to not accept challenges because of your ego, because there's a position that you hold. You're president and CEO of a big organization globally, a pharma company. You've been there for 23 years. What's anyone from the management committee to colleagues in BI going to teach me? I am the wise leader that knows everything. That's not true. I'm not. But sometimes my unconsciousness or my ego gets in the stage and makes me develop these feelings of saying, well, hang on, why are you saying that to me? I'm the president and CEO and so on. So you get to assumptions very fast when your ego comes in, instead of, going back a couple of steps and start asking questions of why you're being told what you're being told. There's a reason behind everything, right?
Keep yourself right-sized, sounds like. That's Very, very interesting how you talk about that. Can you talk to us a little bit about, as president and CEO, leader of an organization, and for you, Augusto, what are some of your most pesky ego identities that you meet on a day to day that you're like, come back here. I'm not, no, not today, not right now.
I think it's the expectations that culture and societies have on bosses, right? Or that you feel that society depicts on bosses that are widely accepted, right? On a president of a country, or there's a certain image and expectations that society has, or that society could have, not necessarily has, but could have on leadership. And then, this you're a boss. You cannot fill in the blank, right? You're the boss, you cannot whatever. You can. But you just mentioned a very interesting example. So you're the boss. You have to be strong. Why are you asking me to to take you to a hospital, right? Assume one of my teammates, and listen, I was the boss of the group that took me to the hospital, right? Say, wait, no, you can't go to the hospital. I will not take you to the hospital because you're the boss, and you need to have your hotel room. You're not. I think society and us ourselves have created this image of a leader that if we fall to, or if we try to follow it, we might end up having or having that, or making that part of the daily noise that actually is affecting your true self, or influencing how you behave, and ultimately challenging your purpose and the values that you're striving to live by.
We've talked about, you could say, the dark side for quite a bit, like the muck, the noise. I also want you to talk a bit about your core values and what you've discovered about those. And early in our conversation, you mentioned about an experience you'd like to talk about. So maybe this is also the time to do that. I really would love to hear that, because what I sense with you, Augusto, is that you've almost fallen in love with the core. So that whenever you stray, it's like, nah, that's not it. I'm going to have to come back. You know what back means. So to say a bit more about your core values and what you've learned about those.
Everything that I strive for and the values that I live for, I think can be pinpointed with one word that you actually used in the invitation to this program, and that is compassion. Right? We are, for my belief right now, my mindset is we are the biggest critics of ourselves. Right? So if we are so critical to ourselves that we believe we need to behave according to certain patterns, or that fear drives us X and Y, so we can very easily become very uncompassionate of our own self. And you can talk about respect, humility, integrity. If you start practicing compassion with your own self, and then expand it to your biggest self, with yourself with capital S, and we can talk a bit more about it if you want, you will follow and live by these values that I was sharing with you earlier, and then you share with everyone that's listening right now, that I live by. So respect, integrity, honesty. It's just understanding that we're human beings, that we're far from perfection, and that we're on constant evolution and constant improvement. Maybe I can share with you something that I have experienced in this last part of the transpersonal coaching psychology. It is based on a very interesting concept, which is become or expand your awareness. It's through a process that not only you become aware of your own self, like a meditation like process, but then you start expanding the level of your awareness, and start expanding, going beyond your own self, and starting being conscious about your biggest self with capital S, this level of connectedness that you may have with everything. And then if you're able to observe yourself, not only with small s, but with capital S, you see that the issue you're facing in Earth might be bigger than you. but that you are also bigger than whatever issue you're facing. And I keep coming to that. Because in these sessions with the open awareness level, you create a space, so it's called a liminal space, and so on. I'm not going to go through the process right now, but you create a space where you understand that no matter what happens and no matter what challenge you're facing, everything is fine because you are you and you're in this growth process. And that's just fascinating, Hilke, to go to that concept where if you are actually with someone in one of these sessions and you reach that stage to say, you know what, I was worrying about nonsense stuff. Deep in my heart and deep in my values and in my purpose, it will all be fine.
I love the sentence that you said, that I am bigger than me. Also, that problems are bigger than me. And because I'm bigger than me and problems are bigger than me, it's okay. And now I'm doing the rational part of what you said. And then also, as you talked, I could sense the transmission of the broader awareness that includes everything and everyone and all times. And there's a sense of okayness in that. So, from the day to day chair, I have to ask then, but Augusto, you have objectives. You are president of a company. Oh, and by the way, you live in a world where there's lots of issues: global warming, polarization, wars, etc. Right? Long lists. So, describe a bit about how you connect to that liminal perspective without and connect to what I just said without going into denial or spiritual bypasses.
That's a very interesting point you're bringing because that's often a belief that is shared globally. Again, according to expectations of what we should do as a company and so on. My own experience, and I'm going to talk about my own experience, what happens to me, is by fostering this understanding or this level of self-reflection within teams or this increased or improved level of consciousness within the teams you lead, results come quite easy. So, and I keep explaining this or sharing this with my team. So, result, if you and analyze for one moment the word result, right? So we're in a company, you need to achieve results and you need to, I don't know, move X amount of boxes to patients and so on a yearly basis. And you need to achieve this certain result. Clear. A result is just a result. So it's the reflection of work that you've done. If it's a yearly objective and you are assessing a yearly result, it's just the outcome of 365 days working together. And those 365 days working together, even if it's with a 2 millimeters, sorry, we use millimeters in Mexico, but let's say a quarter of an inch better every day, if you can and commit to becoming 1/4 of an inch, a better version of your own self daily, there's no way that those results are going to be bad. Even if you do not reach those results, the outcome for the total company is much better. So my theory and the theory behind is I am trying and working towards having a better company, because if the addition of every single colleague that works in Boehringer Ingelheim strives to be a better version of themselves, we will all make a better version of Boehringer Ingelheim.
So, how do you then talk to somebody, right, who is maybe in the beginning of the meeting of the clearing? It's like, I'm in it and I have this target and now I have to have fewer resources and these guys in the other department are not talking to me, or whatever the issue du jour might be, right? These things that are common. How do you interact with that?
We're starting. I have with my own team, with my management committee team, twice per year, we move out of the office, and we spend 3 or 4 days closer to nature, and helped with a business coach, not to talk about the objectives, but to talk about how we work together. Because you just said something very important in your sentence or in your question, which is, listen, I have less resources and my objective is very challenging, and this person would not talk to me, right? And this is like most 9 out of 10 times that you're facing a problem in a company, it is due to avoiding a difficult conversation, right? Why is this person not talking to you? Have you tried to reach that person? No. Again, ego right aside. No, why would I? It's not my job. It's their job to talk to me because I am blah 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 XYZ department, and they have to come to me and talk to me. And the reason that lies behind is truly because you are fearing a difficult conversation. That's in my head, right? At least. So by having this time to move out of the office and trying to foster a culture where you can actually talk about issues, then I think you're at least a couple of, again, another quarter of an inch better as a company. It's not easy. It takes time, and it takes people a different level of consciousness to actually follow that path. But I don't believe, as I started my meeting, I don't believe companies fail because they don't know how to do what they're supposed to do. That is, let's assume Boehringer Ingelheim, or not going to talk about failure for Boehringer Ingelheim, but a pharmaceutical company would not fail because they don't know how to do medicines. If at all, they usually fail because they don't have a culture where they could sit down and solve issues together. So they fail because of culture, not because they were not capable enough to manufacture products.
So if every person becomes a quarter of an inch better every day, then we all get better every day. That's a beautiful purpose and a beautiful invocation. And I also appreciate how consciously you're choosing to take your team there. We started out talking about Sonora, the desert, or nature, taking people into nature that reminds us of things that are true between us that our mind, our ego sometimes forget, that we actually can talk to each other, that it's actually okay, which may get to that sense of okayness that you were talking to earlier. So, Augusto, we are getting towards the very last few minutes of our conversation. And so if you think about what you would like to say to future generations, you've been on this planet for a few decades now, right? What would you like to say to future generations or maybe younger generations about connecting, about what's truly important, and maybe say a bit more also about this connection you've made with compassion?
I would start, and maybe this is my own experience, but the generations I observe today of youngsters have a higher level of awareness than I ever, like I see it in my kids, right? I have my son Augusto is, I think, 3 times more mature than I currently am. And Alfredo, on the other hand, starts his day by meditating like daily, right? And they're 23 and 22. And then my daughter also, she's at school, they were starting the day when we lived in Argentina with 15 minutes of self-centering before they started classes. So I think there are some trends towards increasing consciousness in youth. I don't think everywhere, but that's good to see. And if this is the advice I give to colleagues in BI, to the talents being developed in BI. Stay true to yourself. Be patient with you, but stay true to yourself. That's point number one. And B, be open to the opportunities that you will have. And maybe to that second point, my plan was I never in my head had a plan to go to Germany for 4 years, go to Singapore for 4 years, go to Buenos Aires for 6 years, return to Mexico to this position. It happened. The opportunity arose. And even when I had fears, I carried on doing it because it was aligned to my belief. So these opportunities will come. If you're open enough and your mindset is that of observant of being observant to those opportunities, you will see an X amount of opportunities once your mind is set to that. So, A, continue to be true to yourself, explore it on a daily basis, and B, be open to whatever opportunity lies around you.
Stay true to yourself and stay open to the possibilities that life offers every day. So, staying true to yourself, patience, compassion, to me, that's one of the core insights and transmissions that I'm receiving as I speak with you, Augusto, is this sense of patience and compassion. So maybe as we get to more closing reflections, what would you say to somebody who is in their personality structure impatient with themselves? Because they just feel like I have no choice. I have no choice. I got so much going on. I'm so far behind. I am so much not what I want to be yet. And the world, by the way, is also not where I want to be. I just don't know where I find the wherewithal for patience. What would you say?
Take a step aside, and start breathing and start creating this space of awareness where you will realize that there's always a possibility. There is always a possibility. And call a coach. Call Hilke, call Augusto, because there is so. But this is. I think you need to be brave enough and conscious enough to actually, as you said at one point, raise your hand and say, "I'm at a point where I can't move. Right? I don't see possibilities. And it's fine, and it's okay. So do not feel that it's common. It happens. It happened to me. It happens to everyone. So it's not uncommon. But feel in this part or this segment about be open for possibilities. One possibility is to really explore how can you create this space of awareness to be aware of all the possibilities. And there are tools for it, and one very useful tool is to find someone that can help you do it.
Find the possibilities, actually. Define the possibilities of awareness. There's actually awareness right now, right here, and we can allow ourselves to access it. As you're speaking, I feel the sense of being enveloped by it. It's like, I was in this small room and I'm like, oh no, it's much bigger. Like, oh, let's look out the window. There's all of this life that I'm part of. So as I'm thinking of this conversation, what really stands out to me, Augusto, is where you started with space, creating space. And to me, I sense from you that you don't take space lightly, even though you take it lightly, but you take it with a lot of purpose. Like, no, I'm consciously putting myself in this so that the experience of space actually happens, and not only for me, but also for the people around me. And I don't think it's a coincidence that your children are also on that path in their own way. But that's just entirely my assumption, might entirely be my ego saying that that's entirely possible too. And also what I took away is this inquiring mind. Like, okay, so what's not working? And that may be the question that we can leave each other with, and leave all of us who have been listening or who will be listening to this with. Like, what is uncomfortable to you right now? What would it be like if you let yourself fall? The ego fall. Let the ego fall. Whatever you think should happen, let that fall and let go of that, and let yourself enter into a space where you know that it's okay, where you just know it's okay. Not some belief, but something that we experience. Just because you allow yourself to fall. This conversation, Augusto, to me has been a lot about letting go and surrendering, and then entering into space and not staying there, but I'm being of service to that. Augusto, maybe one final few words you'd like to say by way of closing.
Just to thank you, Helke, for having me here today. A big thank you for the audience, for your audience, for who's listening. My hope that a few of the words that we've shared today are useful for them. And maybe just to close up, because this is very linked to Boehringer Ingelheim, this is a sentence I often use with colleagues when I see all over, when I see that there's a level of comfort and non-comfort that they're experiencing. Boehringer Ingelheim is a company that has been around since 1885. And the company, for sure, will live for another 130 years. So Boehringer Ingelheim is bigger and will continue to be bigger than you. But at the same time, you as an individual are way bigger than just a company. So how do you merge both and live being aware of these both facts?
What a beautiful invitation. What a beautiful invitation to perspective. Paradox of greatness, of connectedness that goes beyond time and history that we're part of, that allows us also to transcend what is here right now and at the same time be fully part of it. So thank you so much, Augusto. Thank you, everybody, for listening. You've been listening to Rooted and Unwavering. We invite you to subscribe to this podcast. If you'd like to dive deeper, we also have monthly conversations, Growth Leaders Network community conversations that you can find on LinkedIn or on our website. Next time, January 27th, we'll be here with Valerie Bemo, who is a deputy director at the Gates Foundation, and she serves all emergency relief areas from the Gates Foundation. And we'll hear more from her about being rooted and unwavering. Augusto, thank you again for opening so much space and in perspective for us today. That's it for today. Thank you again, everyone, for listening, for your presence. I hope you found some helpful nuggets to help you connect more deeply to what you truly and who you truly are. This was Rooted and Unwavering, where we help to connect leaders more deeply to their innate potential. And I'm your host, Hilke Faber. See you next time.
Thank you for joining us in today's episode of Rooted and Unwavering, leadership conversations about courageous connectedness, presented by the leadership development company, Growth Leaders Network. To learn more, subscribe to this podcast, connect with Growth Leaders Network and Hilke Faber on LinkedIn, or read Hilke's award-winning book, Taming Your Crocodiles. Now take a moment and appreciate something that is great about you. Celebrate the gift that you are and enjoy connecting more deeply to your best self today. See you next time on Rooted and Unwavering.